Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, he's under pressure from many of his own MPs to back a second referendum on Brexit. But so far, Jeremy Corbyn has proved reluctant to commit. The Labour leader has long been seen as something of a Eurosceptic, and now some are accusing his top team of advisers of discouraging him from supporting what some call the people's vote. But is that really the case as MPs prepare for another critical week on Brexit? Here's our political correspondent, Michael Crick.
All these derogations from our sovereignty, all this dismemberment of our parliamentary institutions.
The old Commonwealth and the poor countries want us to stay in and help them from inside.
Historically, Europe's divided Labour as much as the Tories. Successive Labour leaders torn by the economic merits of in or out against the background of the best tactics to help in British politics.
Are you prepared to accept the verdict of the people? But you are prepared to listen to it!
And during the 1975 referendum, the Labour left, led by Jeremy Corbyn's great hero, Tony Benn, urged Britain to leave the then common market.
But the answer is that we're in a very powerful position because we're such good customers of the common market.
Playing in Clapham this week, a play about the post-war Attlee Labour government, to which many Corbynites aspire.
Any other cabinet appointments you'd like to share with us, Prime Minister?
Bringing Nye Bevan into cabinet.
You're what?
It's less than a year since we had to expel him from the party.
Oh, he's completely undisciplined.
He doesn't know the meaning of loyalty.
And what are you thinking of giving him?
Health and housing.
It's by historian Francis Beckett, who voted for Corbyn as Labour leader, but has great concerns about his long-time aversion to the EU.
You'll be Chancellor.
Well, Corbyn, of course, was very much opposed to entry into Europe in 1975, and for reasons that a lot of socialists then would understand. He saw Europe as a sort of reactionary organisation which was going to hold Britain back. When Britain did have a left-wing socialist government, the Europe was a kind of capitalist club that would prevent it from doing the things that Corbyn and Tony Benn and others wanted it to do. That argument made some sort of sense in 1975.
One important theme of this Congress has been Europe in 1992.
Most of the Labour movement became pro-Europe after the European Commission President Jacques Delors told the 1988 Trades Union Congress Europe would deliver for them.
The creation of a statute for European companies which will include the participation of workers or their representatives.
But some Labour MPs still warned Europe impeded the march to socialism.
That will undermine any social objective that any Labour government in this country, or any other government for that matter, would wish to carry out. And does he not recognise the great danger to the cause of socialism in this country or any other country of the imposition of a banker's Europe on the people of this continent?
251,000.
2 decades later, that backbencher became Labour leader, with much the same views and advisers from the same era. Harry Fletcher helped Corbyn win the leadership, then spent a year in his office, though he now works for Plaid Cymru.
The people around Jeremy are experienced, seasoned, they've got ability, intelligence, a grasp of policy, but they also share the leader's views on a whole range of political issues, including the positives and negatives of Europe.
And there are a lot of negatives in their view.
I would think that the negatives outweigh the positives because of this core thing about the hindrance EU brings to attaining socialism in the UK.
Recently, the focus has been on the so-called 4 M's around Corbyn. Len McCluskey, the leader of Unite, the union. McCluskey's chief of staff, Andrew Murray. The former Guardian writer, Seamus Milne. And Corbyn's chief of staff, Carrie Murphy.
Well, Seamus Milne and Andrew Murray come out of something called Straight Left, which was a sect of the old Communist Party. It was one of the most rigidly sort of Leninist sects. They're both very clever men, highly intellectual, very interesting people to talk to, but they are intellectually arthritic because they kind of almost learned intellectual arthritis as a result of being a part of this sort of splinter organisation from the Communist Party.
But why is that relevant to Europe?
It's relevant because they're stuck in 1975. The line that was laid down in 1975, that the European Union is a capitalist club and no socialist can support going into it, that line was laid down in 1975 and hasn't been changed, and they are unable to deviate from it.
On The Guardian, Seamus Milne denounced the EU regularly, accusing it of an economic ideology of deregulation, privatisation and the privileging, he said, of corporate power. During the 2016 referendum, Jeremy Corbyn did some campaigning for Remain, but left it to other Labour figures to lead the fight. And few in his office were that upset by the result, Harry Fletcher says.
The vast majority of the senior officials in the leader's office were hostile to aspects of the EU, but there were rarely discussions about how people were going to vote. Maybe it was an assumption that everybody knew that they were hard-left Brexiteers, but it wasn't an issue that dominated conversation.
3 of the so-called 4Ms don't do public interviews. Len McCluskey, who does, says his union strongly back Remain and that it's absurd to suggest Corbyn is a prisoner of his advisers.
That's fanciful. I mean, the reality is that kind of projects an image, and maybe that's why this is being spun, that somehow Jeremy Corbyn isn't a strong leader. Believe you me, from what I know of Jeremy, he's a very decent, honest, fair guy. But he's very, very strong and determined in his views. So no Gang of 4 or anybody else is going to stop him from doing what he thinks is right.
3/4 of Labour Party members, according to a recent poll, want a second referendum. Even more to stay in the EU. In his reservations about both, Jeremy Corbyn could disappoint the hundreds of thousands he inspired to join his party and risk being another Labour leader accused of selling out.
The only 2 circumstances I could see Jeremy stepping down was if his health went and he's extremely healthy and fit, or secondly, if the Labour members rose up and said, "You've let us down, you've sold us out," he might have to consider his position, but there's no sign of that happening yet.
Not for the first time, a Labour leader has a delicate balancing act on Europe. What's best for Britain? What's best for his party?
Well, joining me now from her Wirral constituency is the Labour MP, Alison McGovern, who supports the campaign for a second referendum. Alison McGovern, do you think that Jeremy Corbyn's aides are holding him back from going explicitly for a second referendum?
No, and what that piece missed is that the Labour Party is a democratic party, and we spent a lot of time over the summer talking to each other, listening to each other and coming up with our policy on Brexit at our September conference. And so this idea that somehow, I mean, Jeremy's leadership, you know, it's no secret that I wasn't one of the people who backed him, but his leadership is supposed to be about listening to the members. So this idea that somehow people are telling him what to do, I think Len McCluskey was right, it's just not realistic.
Well, if you're democratic, then surely you should abide by your manifesto in which you promised to respect the result of the 2016 referendum.
We have, and that's why our policy said that we would judge the Prime Minister's proposals on its merits, that we would hold it to the standards of what was promised by David Davis in terms of the benefits of the single market. We've gone through that process now. We've judged the deal on its merits according to our tests, and that's why we put the motion of no confidence, and we will be trying to find some sort of Brexit deal that protects working people, or if not, we will need to have a public vote. because the clock is ticking and Brexit has got to be dealt with as an issue so that we can get back to the things that people really care about.
But your campaign for a people's vote is in some trouble, isn't it? I mean, MPs from across the spectrum dropped an amendment calling for a people's vote. One of Ian Lavery, an MP close to Jeremy Corbyn, echoed Theresa May's concerns about the consequences of a second referendum. I mean, would you accept your campaign is struggling somewhat?
No, because what we're going to do in Parliament next week is that the House of Commons is going to say to the government, you need to get the Plan B, and we will take control of the timetable in order to make sure that we have that Plan B, because nobody wants to see no deal happen. Earlier in this programme, Philip Hammond was talking about running down the clock and trying to force people to vote for their deal. So next week, you will see MPs, I'm sure, standing up to that idea that we can just be bullied into voting for a deal that will be bad for British people.
But if push comes to shove and you're not successful next week and it's a choice of no deal or Theresa May's deal, would you back Theresa May's deal?
That simply cannot be the choice. That is no choice at all. And actually,
but if it is,
you know, we know that the British public don't think that it's a good choice because the deal is very unpopular, and we all know the consequences of no deal. So we need that Plan B to come forward now, and either that's something that members of Parliament can in good conscience sign up to, or Theresa May needs to put her deal to the public alongside our EU membership and say, is this what you really wanted by Brexit?
Yes or no, if that's the choice.
We know so much more about Brexit now than we ever did in 2016.
I'm not sure whether you're hearing me, but Alison McGovern, thank you very much for joining us.